The woman we would come to know as Barbara Jordan was born in 1936 in Houston's Fifth Ward, a tight-knit, working-class Black community where faith, family, and discipline weren't just values. They were survival. Her father, Ben, earned just under $1,000 a year at a warehouse along the Houston Ship Channel. To stretch those wages, he partnered with co-workers on a small venture selling their own brand of soda and even founded a church. His brother Charlie drove a red truck for the Southwestern Paper Company, while Charlie's wife, Alice, taught English in a nearby town. By 1940, the combined income of these three working adults was barely $1,500 a year. Vacations were a luxury they never knew. Even trips outside Houston were rare. Life moved in steady rhythm. Weekdays meant work for the adults, school for the children, and at home, Barbara's mother Arlene kept the household running with long hours of cooking, ironing, and hand-washed laundry. For many Black parents in mid-20th century America, the dream was stability, a steady job, a respected profession, and a family rooted in dignity and faith. Barbara Jordan's parents shared those hopes. Her father envisioned a future where Barbara, like her older sister Rosemary, would graduate from Phyllis Wheatley High School, move on to Prairie View College, and then, like her Aunt Mamie, build a career as a music teacher. It was a safe, honorable path for a young Black woman of the time. Marriage, following her mother's example, was simply expected. But Barbara had other plans. By her senior year, she had resolved to become a lawyer, a bold choice, and one not tied directly to civil rights, but to her own sense of independence and purpose. At just 16, she delivered a prize-winning speech in Chicago on the power of education, standing before the audience in a formal gown and asking, "Do you want to be a free human being, standing on your own feet, accepting the responsibilities, the duties that go with that position as an effective member of society?" Her words reflected the ideals of self-sufficiency and civic duty, values central to Black progress in the Cold War era. And as she pressed forward at Phyllis Wheatley High School and later Texas Southern University, Barbara drew strength from her family, but above all from the Black teachers who provided the foundation for her rise. At Wheatley High School, Barbara stood out, not for being loud, but for being sharp. Debate became her sanctuary, and soon, her superpower. But her story didn't begin in isolation. It stretched back to her grandfather, Edward Patton, once a member of the Texas legislature during Reconstruction. By the time Barbara was born, the promise he represented had been rolled back by Jim Crow, the poll tax, and the relentless disenfranchisement of Black Texans. One of the most unforgettable figures to visit Phyllis Wheatley High School was Edith Sampson, a tall, commanding attorney from Chicago with a voice that carried the power of conviction. The Black press had celebrated her as the Negro Portia, and she had already earned international recognition as a delegate to the United Nations and a forceful critic of communism. For Barbara Jordan and her classmates, Sampson was living proof that a Black woman could step onto the world stage, challenge foreign powers, and still command respect at home. Yet Sampson's message revealed the contradictions of her era. Sponsored by the U.S. State Department, she spoke with passion against communism and defended American democracy, even while acknowledging its failures. She refused to excuse segregation, but her priority was to counter Soviet propaganda rather than to spotlight racial injustice. In her presence, Barbara Jordan saw both the possibilities and the limits of Black leadership during the Cold War. Sampson's confidence, her stature, and her role as a trailblazer stirred Barbara's imagination. Here was a model of success that stretched beyond the safe expectations set for her, proof that law, politics, and public life could be the path for a Black woman determined to make her mark. Barbara would one day dedicate a speech to her, saying, "You made me believe that someone like me could belong in the arena." Barbara's brilliance didn't go unnoticed. Denied entry to the University of Texas because of segregation, she instead enrolled at Texas Southern University, a historically Black college just across town. There, she dominated the debate team, defeating peers from Ivy League schools and sharpening the rhetorical skills that would become her signature. From there, she set her sights even higher, earning a law degree from Boston University in 1959, far from the heat of Texas, but never far from the weight of its history. When Barbara Jordan arrived in Boston in the late 1950s, she stepped into a city defined by both promise and prejudice. Black Bostonians were clustered in 3 distinct neighborhoods, each with its own story, yet all shared the weight of segregation, racism, and limited political power. In those years, many placed their hopes in a young politician named John F. Kennedy. As a congressman and later senator, Kennedy reached out directly to Black voters, earning their loyalty and convincing many, including Jordan, that civil rights could find champions in high office. That impression would stay with her for life. Boston also carried another legacy. Just a few years earlier, ambitious young Southerners like Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott had walked the same streets, pursuing their studies and leaving their mark. Now Jordan was following in their footsteps, wondering how she would find her own place in this northern city's racial landscape. Her law school, Boston University's School of Law, was housed at a towering granite structure hall named after Isaac Rich on Beacon Hill, just steps from the city's courthouses. Each morning, she took the streetcar across town and climbed the steep hill to class. Inside, she found soaring lecture halls, a vast law library, and rooms filled with the sharp energy of future attorneys. It was a world far removed from Texas Southern, both intimidating and exhilarating. And for Barbara Jordan, it was the beginning of her transformation into a lawyer and, eventually, a national voice for justice. When she returned to Houston, the 1960s were in full boil. Civil rights tension gripped the South. Marches, boycotts, and resistance to Jim Crow were challenging the old order, and Barbara Jordan was ready to join that fight, not with fists, but with legislation. In 1966, she made history. Elected to the Texas Senate, Barbara Jordan became the first Black woman to serve in that body since Reconstruction. By the early 1970s, Barbara Jordan's reputation had outgrown the Texas Senate. Her command of policy, her gift for persuasion, and her steady moral compass made the next step inevitable. Nearly 2 centuries before Barbara Jordan took her oath of office, another leader was making history in this city. In 1787, George Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, where the framers drafted the nation's founding document. Its preamble began with 3 enduring words, "We the people." But in truth, those words were never meant to include everyone. Women, the enslaved, indigenous peoples, all were excluded from the vision of representation. By the time Barbara arrived on the political stage, "We the people" was still a promise unfulfilled, especially in the South. The same year Barbara Jordan arrived in Congress, 5 men were caught breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. At first, it seemed like a strange, isolated crime. But soon, investigators uncovered a far more troubling truth.
I knew that I had compromising material in my office over at the Committee to Re-elect, and I went over and shredded everything, including, I think, 13 consecutively serialized $100 bills, which I put between 2 pieces of paper so that the people working in the office wouldn't see that I was shredding $100 bills and thinking I'd lost my mind.
The burglars were tied to President Richard Nixon's re-election campaign, and the break-in was just the beginning. A trail of secret tape recordings, hush money payments, and coordinated cover-ups began to emerge. The presidency itself was now under suspicion. By 1974, the scandal had reached the House Judiciary Committee, the body responsible for deciding whether to recommend impeachment. And among its members was Barbara Jordan. When she rose to speak on July 25, 1974, she began not with accusations, but with the very words penned in 1787.
"We the people." It's a very eloquent beginning. But when that document was completed on the 17th of September in 1787, I was not included in that we the people. I felt somehow for many years that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton just left me out by mistake. But through the process of amendment, interpretation, and court decision, I have finally been included in we the people. Today I am an inquisitor, and hyperbole would not be fictional and would not overstate the solemnness that I feel right now. My faith in the Constitution is whole, it is complete, it is total. And I am not going to sit here and be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, the destruction of the Constitution.
Barbara Jordan's words helped crystallize the stakes of the Watergate hearings. In the days that followed, the Judiciary Committee approved 3 articles of impeachment against President Nixon for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and defiance of Congress. But before the full House could take up the case, the evidence became overwhelming. The Supreme Court forced Nixon to release secret White House tapes, which revealed him directing the cover-up from the very beginning. With his own party abandoning him and certain conviction in the Senate looming, Nixon made a choice no other president had ever made. On August 9, 1974, he resigned from the presidency. The Watergate scandal shook Americans' trust in government to its core, but it also introduced the nation to a new guardian of democracy, Barbara Jordan. Before the mid-1960s, voting in much of the South was not a right guaranteed to all. It was a privilege guarded by poll taxes, literacy tests, and intimidation. For generations, these barriers kept millions of Black citizens from the ballot box. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 began to tear those barriers down, but it needed to be renewed and defended. In 1975, Barbara Jordan played a pivotal role in reauthorizing the act, pushing to ensure its protections reached Hispanic and Indigenous communities as well. Her legislative work stretched far beyond voting rights. She championed programs for the poor, protections for the disabled, and opportunities for those too often pushed to the margins. She wasn't interested in grandstanding for the cameras. Barbara measured her success not in headlines, but in laws passed and lives improved. Away from the public eye, Barbara's life was marked by quiet resilience. She battled multiple sclerosis for years, later facing leukemia with the same determination she brought to her work. There were rumors of a long-term partnership with Nancy Earl, relationship she kept private and dignified in an era when openness could have ended a career. In 1979, after just 3 terms in Congress, Barbara Jordan made a decision that surprised many. She stepped away from elected office. But retirement from politics did not mean retreat from public life. She became a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, pouring her energy into teaching government and ethics. Her classroom was more than a lecture hall, it was a training ground for future leaders. Students left not just knowing the Constitution, but believing in it. The early 1990s brought America face-to-face, once again, with its deepest wounds. In 1991, the brutal beating of Rodney King by Los Angeles police officers and their subsequent acquittal ignited protests and riots across the nation. The footage was undeniable, but the verdict reminded Black communities of a justice system that too often failed them. While younger activists took to the streets demanding change, Jordan represented continuity, a reminder of how far the nation had come since Jim Crow, but also how much further it had to go.
People will never go home to their families again, and please, we can get along here. We all can get along. We just gotta, we're all stuck here for a while. Let's try to work it out. Let's try to beat it, Let's try and work it out.
In 1992, Barbara Jordan returned to the national spotlight. On the opening night of the Democratic National Convention, she delivered another unforgettable keynote. Her words, calm, clear, and resolute, reminded the nation of its shared values at a time of division. It was proof that, even after more than a decade out of office, her voice still had the power to command the country's attention.
There is something different about tonight. There is something special about tonight. What is different? What is special? I, Barbara Jordan, am a keynote speaker.
In her later years, she served as an advisor to Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, bringing her constitutional expertise and moral authority to issues ranging from ethics in government to immigration reform. Her influence stretched far beyond her lifetime, inspiring a new generation of Black women in politics, from Kamala Harris to Stacey Abrams, who saw in Barbara not just a pioneer, but a blueprint. On January 17, 1996, Barbara Jordan died at the age of 59 from complications related to pneumonia and leukemia. She passed quietly, but her absence was felt loudly across Texas, across the country, and across generations. Thank you for watching another Fresh K documentary. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life and legacy of Barbara Jordan, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss our next story.